Hi all, we're going to do an introduction to computer programming. There's many different ways that you can get started, but for now we're going to use Visual Studio. I found this version of Visual Studio. There's many different versions of Visual Studio. This is the Community Edition. It's free. And it looks like a great way to get started. So it's easy and painless to download and install. It's just a couple clicks. So we'll go ahead and click this to download it. Here it wants to download the installer. This isn't the actual application, it's the installer. So vs.community.exe. Save the file, we'll save it to the desktop. We're done with this page. Go ahead and close this. Okay, here's the installer. That's not the actual application, it's just the installer. Instead of installing it through a web page, companies have been going through these installers because the installers can download and install an application better than doing it through a web page. So if there's a problem with the download, if your internet shuts off or something, the installer can correct things. So that's why they went to the installers. So just click that to start the installer. Okay, it asks a few basic questions here. Where do you want it installed? This is just the path on your C colon, on your C drive. For most of us, you can just leave that alone. Businesses like to put things in certain areas. That's why they give you the option to change it here. And then down here at the bottom, you could go with a typical install or custom. Same thing there. Most of us just use the typical, but sometimes businesses like to do a custom. So for most of us, don't change the path and just use a typical install. Here's the license. You can read the license here and click install. It asks if you're the administrator. Say yes. You have to be logged in as the administrator to install applications, and it starts to install. It'll take a while to install, depending on the speed of your internet. It'll take an hour or two. Okay, Visual Studio Community Edition is finished installing. We can launch it from here. You can sign in with your Windows account, your Microsoft account, or you can skip that. We're going to go ahead and skip it for now. We'll come back and talk about that later. Here it's asking you, for now here, just choose general. But when you start Visual Studio, you can pick one of these types of programming applications. What this would be for is if, like, let's say you know you're only going to use Visual Basic. Well, when you start it up, then you'll get the Visual Basic side of Visual Studio, or the C# here. We're going to choose General because we'll be able to choose any of these. So just choose General here. And this here is just color. You know, do you want your program to look blue or dark or light? That's a personal preference there. You can choose anything you like. I'm just going to go ahead and choose blue, the standard. So general and blue here. And then click down here where it says Start Visual Studio. Just has some housekeeping things here. This installer, we don't need that anymore, so we can trash that. So this is Visual Studio. There's 3 panes here. 1 pane, 2 pane, and 3 panes. This one in the middle, this is just some general things that they want you to read through. You can go ahead and close that one. There's 2 tabs here on the side. The Toolbox is the main area. You can open it and close that. And the Solution Explorer here. Okay, so just to show you the basics of how this works, we'll go File, New, Project. And now it's asking you what type of project do you want to make. To get started, the easiest way to get started is Visual Basic. We'll come back later and do some C# and C++ and so on, but we'll start with Visual Basic, Windows application, and a Windows form application. So if you were to take an Introduction to Visual Basic course at a college, they would spend most of the 15 weeks, if it was a 15-week course, on the Windows form application. They might venture out a little bit into the other areas, but for the most part it'll just be on how to program a form application. Stuff down here at the bottom, leave this as all the defaults, the name of the application, where the files are going to be located, and the solution name. We'll come back and catch some of the details on that later, but for now all the defaults are fine. So Visual Basic, Windows form application, and then click the OK button. Okay, so this is a form. We create our Visual Basic form application around this GUI here. GUI, GUI, Graphical User Interface. and we use the toolbox. If we click the toolbox, you can see it. Here's all the things that we can add to that form. It hides the form when we click on that. If we click this little pin, this push pin here, then it brings the form back into view. Okay, so here's the properties. If you don't see the properties, go to view, properties window. So if I close that, then the Solution Explorer fills up the whole thing. We can go view, properties window, and it opens it back up. Be aware of the tabs here. Yeah. So we click on the form. See how it says form 1 here? And we have form 1 properties down here. So this form 1 matches form 1 here. We'll add some stuff to this, like we can take a button, and now we added a button to our form. So that's what's cool about this Visual Basic stuff, is you can create applications just by dropping and dragging items, the GUI items, the GUI items. You know, you don't have to spend hours writing the code to create the form or writing the code to create a button. You can just drop and drag a button onto the screen. And then, just for the sake of the first example, we'll find a text box here. Here's text box. So now we added 2 items, and you know, once you add these things, you can always move them around. So you can see when we click on text box here, then we get text box properties. Click on button, we get button properties. And there's all types of things that you could go in and change here. Like if we wanted to change the text on the button, we could change one of the button properties. Like here's the text property. Right now it's set to button 1. Button 1. Okay. That button 1, it doesn't have anything to do with the code, what's going on behind the scenes. That's just what you see on the screen. So like if we wanted to, we could click there and just type in any old thing. Push me and then hit enter. And now you can see we changed the text on the button. And to here we got the Solution Explorer. Here's form 1. That matches form 1 here. If we click here, we can see our button. And here too, you know, we have form 1 and we have form 1 in the Solution Explorer. If we click here, we have form 1, and then down here you can see our button. That's the button here. And text box is our text box. So let's do something with this. We have to write some code. Now this might be the tricky part. Now, if we double click the button, okay, don't double click the form or the text box, double click the button. See, it opens up the code, CODE. That's the computer code behind the button. When you click the button click, whatever you type in the space, that's what's gonna happen. For now, don't worry about all this. You know, we'll come back and we'll talk about this stuff a lot later. But for now, whatever you type in between here, that's what's gonna happen when you click the button. Okay, so when we click the button, what do we want to happen? Okay, we're going to use this text box 1. You can see here's the actual name of the text box, text box 1. See, text box with the number 1. So we're going to type that in here, text E. Now see how we're getting this drop down here? It can tell that we want to work with something that starts with TE, and it's given us some choices here. So if we want, we can type in text box 1, or we can say, okay, here's our text box that we want to work with. This drop down, that's called IntelliSense. It's just Microsoft's way of trying to make things easier. You know, you don't have to remember exactly what all these things are. You know, it would be impossible to have all these things in your head. So you say, okay, I want to do something with the text box 1. Okay, now what do we want to do with that? Okay, we can say press a period, and then we get this IntelliSense thing again. And here's all the different things that we can do on that text box. Okay, so there's a property called text. Text. Okay, so on text box 1, go to the text property, space, equal sign, and put in these words. Okay, so I got quotes here, and between the two quotes you could put any text there. You know, I typed in hello world. As a convention, the first application you use or you learn when you learn a new language is the hello world application. So it's kind of corny, but that's where we'll start. And as a general rule, it's a good place to start because we can see if our application is working correctly. Okay, so just type in that one line of code, and then you can see how there's tabs up here too. If we click the design tab, it goes back to the form. If we click the form one here, then it goes back to the code. And you can see here, if we click this text box here on the properties for text box 1, this text box 1, that's the name. That's the name of the text box. Here's the text property. See, if we wanted to, we could type in some text here. Hit the enter key. Now you can see that text that we typed here shows up here. So on text box 1, the text property is set to my application. That's why it shows up here. But when we push this button here, it's going to change to Hello World. Okay, so we're done creating the application. Now we have to build it. So build the application here. It opens up the output window, starts to build the application. And this bottom line, that's the important line. You know, build succeeded. You know, nothing failed. If we had errors, if we wrote code with errors, then it would show up here that it didn't succeed. Okay, and then we have to run the application. Click on the debug menu and go start without debugging. Okay, so here's our application. That's what we created. If we push this button, it runs the code and puts Hello World inside the text box. And you can see that's a actual freestanding application, just like Word, Notepad, stuff like that. Okay, when we're done with this, we can go close solution, and it closes the program that we created but leaves Visual Studio open. If we wanted to get back to that, we can go File, Recent Projects, and open that again. And since we're here, if we wanted to, we could add another button here. If we just double click that button, it adds another button. You can click and drag it or just double click it. So now we have a second button, and you can see it's button 2. So here's button 2 properties. If we click this button, inside the code it's still named button 1, but this is the properties for that button. If we click on button 2, then here's our button 2 properties, and the name on here that we see, let's change that to clear. C-L-E-A-R, clear. Okay. Now we'll write some code to go with our clear button. Double click the button. Now we have a button 2 function. See this area here, that's a function. That's the function for button 2. here's our function for button 1. From this sub to end sub. From this sub to this sub. Later on we'll come back and we'll talk about what all these other words mean, but for now don't worry about that. We're just going after what's inside the function. This is a function. This is a function. In Visual Basic they call them subs. Yeah. A function is just a block of code that runs. This is the function for button 1. This is the function for button 2. So now, let's see. When we click button 2, what do we want to happen? We want to clear the text box. So we could cut and paste this. Let's see. Select the code, copy, and paste. Okay. And then you can just go like this. That will clear the text. And then we've already built it, so now we have to rebuild. We rebuild the application because we made changes to it. So you can see it didn't take long at all, right? And then we can go back to debug and run. Start without debugging. Now we have an application with 2 buttons. So let's see if the clear button works. Okay. Push me. Clear. Push me. Clear. So when we press push me, it runs one function. When we press clear, it runs the second function. Okay, so we'll go ahead and stop there. So the whole idea here is we're creating functions and we're putting code inside functions. Close the solution. To close Visual Studio, you can just click the X, or you can go exit here.